в эфире.
Спасибо. Good afternoon, dear students. We start our lecture in bioethics. So register in chat in our stream and we will start. If we will speak about quantity, today is our 7th lecture in bioethics. At all you will have 8 lectures. Today is number 7. Philosophy, next lecture will be number 8. And our class this week number 7, next week number 8. So our course is going to the end. Who have not passed checkpoints, pass these checkpoints, and you will have one more checkpoint. One more checkpoint in both in bioethics and in philosophy. Also, I will account your work during the classes, because as I can see, some students works, others hide behind them and does not work. I will account also your work during the classes. Today we will speak about ethical issues of transplantology. I'll tell you about this problem of transplantology as ethical problem, as bioethical problem, as we'll speak about meaning of regenerative medicine, about bioethics and description of organ transplantation, about physicians' practical approach in transplantology. So what is regenerative medicine? The life sciences are developing so rapidly that it is perfectly possible to think of regenerative medicine as the next stage in the evolution of organ transplantation and indeed of organ function replacement therapies. In bioethics, ethics of organ transplantation refers to the ethical concerns on organ transplantation procedures. Both the source and method of obtaining the organ to transplant are major ethical issues to consider, as well as the notion of distributive justice. So, very complex problem is the source of organs to transplant. This is not only medical, this is ethical and juridical problem. The tools of regenerative medicine include the controversial, highly charged and politicized technology of stem cells. Regenerative medicine addresses stored tissue, samples, handling of data, and consent and authorization models for legal and ethical secondary use of genetic data, especially for unknown future research projects. There are crucial issues in the planning, establishment and management of biobanks in a responsible, transparent and socially just fashion. The World Health Organization argues that transplantation promotes health, but the notion of transplantation tourism has the potential to violate human rights or exploit the poor to have very strict health consequences and to provide unequal access to services, all of which ultimately may cause harm. So the problem is very serious because people are not equal, states are not equal. Some people are poor, some other people are rich. Some states allows organ transplantation, other states prohibit organ transplantation, and sick people who want to save their lives, they need to go to the other countries, for example, and look for opportunities to make these operations. The regenerative medicine issues move to a very controversial subject that spans a number of difficult territories, including genetics, eugenics, racism, and neuroethics, namely behavioral genetics. So there are some definitional and methodological difficulties. Perhaps the most worrying fear is the likelihood of political agendas being used in the skilled social interpretation of incomplete emergent data. Regardless of the gift of life in the context of developing countries. This might be coercive. The practice of coercion could be considered exploitative of the poor population, violating basic human rights according to the articles of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. There are such serious problems as selling of organs from poor countries to the more rich ones, as the problem of taking organs from people who are in the situation of clinical death, of between life and death, and problem of donation is very serious problem. Because criterion for legal death cannot be adequately allocated and defined, and can easily change with changing technology. As controversies of the boundary of life and death grow, the debate of when terminate end-of-life care and start organ harvesting ensures these debates are very serious. Organ transplantation is both a life-extending and a life-saving medical procedure in which a whole of partial organ or cells in cell therapy from a deceased or living person is transplanted into another individual, replacing the recipient's non-functioning organ with the donor's functioning organ. Transplant centers in different parts of the world successfully transplant kidneys, livers, lungs, hearts, pancreases, and intestinal organs, and the procedure is considered the preferred treatment for several indications. Since the first kidney transplant in 1954, the increasing success of and innovations in transplantation have created a demand for organs that greatly exceeds the supply in most countries. So, the demand for organs exceeds the supply in most of the countries. And problem of donation organs, I told you, is very strict. Organ transplantation presents several ethical challenges. Amongst these are issues related to the determination of death, organ procurement, and organ allocation. One of the questions being debated is whether after death an individual's organs are societal resource to be automatically recovered or an individual's personal property requiring his or her approval to organ recovery. Of course, this is ethical problem. This is problem for relatives of the person who died. This is problem very serious juridical problem and human rights problem. Organ procurement from the living is more accepted in some parts of the world than others. A donation is assessed by weighing the benefit to the recipient against the physical harm and physiological benefit to the donor. Altruism is an acceptable basis for living donation, and some argue that altruism is for most expressed through donation to non-relatives and strangers than to relatives. If lack of organs, of course, a relative can be donors for these organs. The scarcity of organs for transplantation necessitates the establishment of criteria on which to base allocation decisions, particularly for organs from deceased donors. The distribution formula commonly used draws mainly on two general ethical principles: utility and justice. Many allocation decisions require trade-offs in favor of either utility or justice, and thus attempt an acceptable compromise. The laws in most countries require donor consent to posthumous organ donation. Opt-in donor consent is common internationally. In EU countries allow the procurement of organs based on presumed consent, but permit individuals to opt out of donation. Many countries have enacted legislation against commerce in organs. Partly as a result of these legal prohibitions, the phenomenon of transplant tourism has emerged. I told you. Unlike payment for organs, the compensation for expenses incurred by donation is considered completely justified. Genuine compensation is allowed in most countries. Also, there has been little work done to define acceptable limits of reimbursement and, more importantly, to develop schemes to reduce disincentives to donation. There are fewer debates on animal sources, as historically laboratory animals have been used to develop organ transplantation technologies for prolonging human life, such as using animal organs in xenotransplantation of human. This is also a problem for animal rights activists. So, what is the resolving of the problem of organ transplantation? Government agencies, transplant regulatory bodies, and healthcare institutions recommend and set policies that, in addition to legislation, guide transplant practice with respect to definitions of death, allocation decisions, and organ procurement. Organs from the deceased are commonly allocated according to policies established by regional, national, or international transplant organizations. Practice guidelines for deceased donation in instances in which a person's death is expected but has not yet occurred urge that declarations of death or the decisions to withdraw life support be made by a physician who is not a member of the transplant team and before approaching the family about donation. These tasks are often handled by regional organ procurement agencies, which, upon being notified of a potential donor by the transplant center. Consensus statements and recommended ethical practice guidelines on living donation identify several practical elements as essential to ensuring the well-being of living donors. With respect to informed consent, a donor must be fully and accurately informed about and demonstrate an understanding of the risks and benefits of donation as it affects themselves and the recipient. Researchers currently explore prospects of using 3D printing of stem cells to produce organs, but some such research projects have been criticized for their use of human embryos taken through abortions, as in controversies about Planned Parenthood's selling of fetal organs and issues for research. Status of embryo and using stem cells, it's also ethical problem. And these practices of using of human embryos taken through abortions is a very complex problem, and this practice is being criticized. Assessments of medical suitability will depend on which organ is being donated and will be carried out by the transplant team physicians. The donors psychosocial suitability must be evaluated to rule out psychological risk factors such as severe mental disorder. It is also advisable to evaluate other factors such as economic constraints or domestic issues. These evaluations help to determine whether the donor is mentally competent to give informed consent and if he or her decision is voluntary. Because in many countries there is practice of involuntary donation of organs. This practice is very often happens. Many countries in Asia and Africa with limited resources do not have these restrictions and human rights protection. Also, we can speak about public health problems among children and so on and so forth. So, let's speak about such problem as medical tourism. And differences in organ transplantation legislation in different countries. Medical tourism refers to patients traveling across national borders for healthcare elsewhere. People tend to travel for care that either is not available in their home country to perceived to be superior, better quality and delivered in a more timely fashion to where they live. Medical tourism has emerged as a global health care phenomenon, valued as $60 billion worldwide. So medical tourism, it's not compulsory transplantation of organs tourism. No, this is practice when people go to another country for a better health protection, for a better treatment. This is medical tourism. With insurance companies of the USA beginning to integrate foreign care into their coverage by offering discounts to patients agreeing to overseas travel. Medical tourism is projected to become a $21 billion industry per year in USA. So it's a very actual sphere of medicine, of medical services. But we are speaking about transplant tourism, yes, about transplant tourism. Transplant tourism has been used to indicate travel outside of one's country of residence for the principal purpose of obtaining organ transplantation services. Transplant tourism, unlike general medical tourism, has always been surrounded with controversy regarding the source of organs, donor's care after transplantation, and a recipient outcome. Of course, problem of the source of organs is most serious. Though instances of organ buying, selling, and or trafficking occur, emotionally and or biologically related living donor transplants are also achieved by transplant tourists. So people have money but don't have opportunity to make transplantation of organs in their native country. They look for another countries and try to find organ donors. We can speak about selling, buying of organs. This black and white market we can speak about trafficking of organs and so on and so forth. Despite objections to transplant tourism by the transplant community and efforts to boost altruistic organ donation, many patients continue to travel to other countries to receive commercial transplants. Of course, commercial transplants is most stable because this is a business, type of business. So there are different countries which use this commercial transplant tourism. For example, Saudi Arabia, Taiwan, Malaysia, South Korea, and others. Access to organ transplantation varies according to national circumstances and is partly determined by the cost of healthcare, availability of transplant services, the level of technical expertise, and the availability of organs. The extent of organ sales from commercial living donors was estimated in 2007 to account for 5–10% of kidney transplants performed annually throughout the world. In around 70,000 renal transplants performed worldwide in 2008 is an indication of annual transplant activity. Then between 3,500 and 7,000 commercial renal transplants are performed per year. The stakeholders of commercial transplantation include patients of the waiting lists in developed countries or not on any list in developing countries. Dialysis funding bodies, states, insurers and providers, middlemen, brokers, officials and doctors, hosting transplant centers, organ exporting of selling countries, travel and tourism industries and organ vendors. So this is a complex system of practicing of organization of organ donation on the international level. This system consists of different officials, brokers, doctors being involved in this transplant activity. Of course, patients on the waiting lists, donors, yes, and different organizations which are being involved in organ exporting or selling countries. Of course, travel and tourism industries and organ vendors. So patients refused entry on the waiting list for medical reasons may sometimes seek commercial transplantation. The worldwide escalation in the number of patients with kidney failure, increasing demand for transplantation, shortage in the supply of organs and deaths on the transplant waiting list continue to fuel transplantation tourism. Only about 10% of the approximately of 12,000 patients on a waiting list for a transplant in Japan are transplanted per year. Transplantorism is facilitated by several factors, including the ease of travel as the world has become a global village, difficulty in ensuring compliance with international law, and the widening gap between the rich and the poor. The aim of this, of course, aims of organ transplantation in most of the cases are noble, to save life of a person who need this transplantation, but means to achieve these aims very often are not noble, and we can see criminal, we can see black market of organs, black market of organ transplantations. So this is a problem, this is an ethical problem, yes, and development of technologies for organ transplantation also stimulate development of the buying and selling, problem of buying and selling of organs. And in some developing countries of Asia and Africa, this problem is very, very serious. We can speak about adult organ transplantation and about pediatric organ transplant programs and children's organ transplantation, because not only adults need transplantation, but children also need sometimes these operations. So I told you about transplantorism. Yes, it's a problem. So let's return back to the juridical guarantees of rights, of human rights in the situation of organ transplantation and organ donation. As you can see that organ transplantation started in 1954, was the first kidney transplant, at the second half of the 20th century. So we can speak about challenges, very serious ethical challenges for organ transplantation. We can see problem of scarcity of organs for transplantation. Necessitates the establishment of criteria on which decisions are made about donation, about transplantation. And aim of bioethics is to determine criterions for legal and justified transplantation and not legal, not justified transplantation of organs. because Universal Declaration of Human Rights guarantee rights of people to live, to be protected, guarantee equality of rights of people, and so on and so forth. Even within developed countries, there is concern that enthusiasm for increasing the supply of organs may trample on respect for the right to life. The question is made even more complicated by the fact that irreversibly criterion for legal death cannot be adequately defined and can easily change with changing technology. As controversies on the boundary of life and death grow, the debate on when to terminate end-of-life care and start organ harvesting ensures. Controversies also rise on how to assume consent of organ donation for dead people. In practice, most countries have legislation allowing for implied consent, asking people to opt out of organ donation instead of opt in, but allow family refusals. Implied consent, of course, principle of implied consent is very serious principle, very important principle. Asking people to opt out of organ donation before they, when they are in consciousness, yes, of course, their consent, it's the gate for making these operations. And relatives. Of course, relatives should also give consent for transplantation, for donation of organs. Also, we can speak about cultural differences in understanding of organ transplantation. Religious groups, different traditions, yes, in different countries have different relations to the problem of organ donations. For example, the Christianity for Christian Church, problem of abortion, problem of using of embryos, of killing the embryos. It's a very serious problem. It's abortion for Christian Church is the same as a murder, as a killing of embryos. The importance of religion in Islamic countries is so great that it is difficult to distinguish religious and societal behaviors. The Quran carries complete guidance for the living in the corporeal world, in addition to guidance on man's relationship with God. Such details are relevant to transplantation because in Islamic countries, fatwas must be passed before this practice is allowed and brainstem death is accepted. Today, most of these nations allow both living related and cadaver organ transplantation, but they vehemently reject commercial transplantation. So if transplantation is needed to save human life, it's one situation, and commercial transplant, it's strictly prohibited. Concerning the equating of brainstem death with cardiovascular death, it's also a problem, yes, when it is possible to take organs. It's not only a juridical problem, it's also ethical problem, it's a religious problem, yes. And I told that in different countries, in different religions, this problem is resolved in different ways. Also, we can speak about government agencies, about state regulation of transplantation. I told you about that transplantation of organs is a system which includes patients, donors, different agencies, transplant regulatory bodies, and healthcare institutions recommend and set policies that, in addition to legislation, guide transplant practice with respect to definition of death, allocation decisions, and organ procurement. Organs from the deceased are commonly allocated according to policies established by regional, national, or international transplant organizations. So, if we will make a conclusion about transplantation as a bioethical problem, we need to speak about principle of informed consent. Yes. A donor must be fully and accurately informed about and demonstrate an understanding of the risks and benefits of donation as it affects themselves and the recipient. Also, there is principle of autonomy. So, person or patient has an autonomy in choice, in making of his choice, to be a donor or not to be, to make operations or not to make. So it's principle of autonomy. Also, there is principle of beneficency. So doctors who make operations in transplantology should account principle of beneficency, because they need to protect the rights of people who are commercial donors. Yes, because some people, they don't know about consequences of their organ donations. And except, or I told you about consent may be voluntary or involuntary. In some countries, in developing countries, in countries of where we can see wars, many people can be involuntarily involved in transplantation to save their relatives, to save their lives, to save lives of their families, to take money, to take food. And they need to make such operations. So, bioethics, it's a science that studies the ethical issues of different medical procedures. I told you about status of embryos. So what is the ways how to resolve these problems? Of course, our medicine is developing, very fast developing science sphere, and we can speak about 3D printing of stem cells to produce organs. Maybe in future, problem of organ donation will be less serious because we'll be producing of organs, yes. But now this producing of organs, it's no guarantee that organ will be produced which is needed for operation. But this stem cells banking, it's also kind of commercial service. It's a kind of commercial or business activity. And that's why such research projects have been criticized for their use of human embryos taken through abortions in receiving of these stem cells. And is controversies about Planned Parenthood's selling of fetal organs and tissues for research. So I want to remind you that World Health Organization argues that transplantation promotes health, but transplantation has its boundaries. Out of these boundaries may be problems. And also, alongside with the problem of promoting, with aim of promoting health, we can see problem of making damage to the donors, to the people's health, and so on and so forth. Regardless of the gift of life, in the context of developing countries, this might be coercive. So life is a gift, it not, and our organs is a gift, and nobody can enforce people to make or to be a donor of these organs. Should be juridical and moral criterions for these procedures. Of course, in many cases, transplantation is only one way to save life to a people. And in these cases, of course, these medical procedures is very important. But problem of the source and method of obtaining the organ to transplant, problem of informed consent, voluntary and involuntary donation. It's a very serious problem. Okay, thank you for your attention. In philosophy, next lecture is going to be the last lecture. In bioethics, you will have, it is a pre-last lecture. Okay, thank you for your attention. Goodbye.